All right, welcome to week 7. This is module 13 of the 16 that we're going to cover. Our subject this week, or for this module, is bureaucracy, a word that causes most Americans' eyes to glaze over. In part, that reaction stems from Americans' highly individualistic political culture. Americans don't like being treated like a number, and bureaucratic agencies are designed to do just that. So I'm going to discuss what bureaucracy is, what it does, and why it's important for understanding American government. So what does bureaucracy mean? Like democracy, it's a compound term. Bureau is French for desk. Kratie is, krasi or whatever, is a contraction of the ancient Greek word kratine, which means rule by. So in literal terms, bureaucracy means rule by desk. But in practical terms, it reflects the fact that Congress passes laws, presidents issue executive orders, federal courts issue rulings, but it's bureaucratic agencies that are responsible for actually putting those policies and rulings into effect. A bureaucracy is a governmental unit that is responsible for carrying out and enforcing policies authorized by a legislative body. People who work in bureaucratic agencies are alternatively described as bureaucrats, civil servants, or public servants. Most civil servants are hired through the Civil Service Commission, and that commission evaluates prospective personnel based on qualifications and merit. The heads of most bureaucratic agencies, and certainly among the largest, the cabinet level departments, are subject to Senate confirmation. They're nominated by the president and then subsequently must be confirmed by the Senate. The text describes 3 basic models of democracy. First, you have the monopolistic model, which involves an agency within a bureaucracy that provides a single service without any kind of competition. The assigned reading notes the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS is an example of an agency that provides a service in a non-competitive environment. Amtrak and NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, are both examples of agencies that were previously monopolistic but that today face private competition. The complaint regarding this model is that lacking meaningful competition, there's little incentive for innovation or improvement of services. Although in the instance of the IRS, it seems unlikely you would see many Americans demanding more efficient collection of taxes. Second, the acquisitive model of bureaucracy is modeled on the recognition that parts of the bureaucracy are given similar or overlapping tasks in competition with one another to acquire, again, limited resources. A particularly good example of this type of bureaucratic activity occurs in the military, where you see a lot of inter-service rivalries leading to a great deal of duplication. For example, the U.S. Army does not want to have to place its faith in the Air Force to invest in what they call close air support, right? Being able to protect immediate areas of battle space. So the Army insists on having its own air cavalry wings, and they basically operate a great number of helicopter fleets that support infantry operations. Likewise, the assigned reading notes that there's a great deal of competition within the intelligence community, which are the 17 independent and relatively autonomous agencies responsible for collecting, analyzing, and disseminating political and military intelligence. Those agencies compete with one another for, again, resources and recognition. For example, the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, is often in competition with the National Security Agency, or the NSA, for resources associated with what we call SIGINT, which is signals in intelligence, our ability to intercept telephone calls and things like that. Third, the assigned reading discusses Weber's model of bureaucracy. This model is named after the famous German sociologist and political scientist Max Weber, who was a pioneer in the study of bureaucratic politics. He believed that bureaucracy was the most efficient way for government policies to be organized and implemented. He contended that a bureaucracy organized along rational lines will be characterized by certain tendencies, which he characterized as standard operating procedures. So to illustrate what he's talking about, Consider a bureaucratic agency that's involved with the provision of education, a university like Rogers State University. Although it's a state agency, the way it goes about providing education shows some of the core attributes of a rationally organized and operating bureaucratic agency. First, you have division of labor. Agencies have separate departments that provide an operational specialization. At RSU, we obviously have different departments dedicated to our academic specialties, English, fine arts, history, etc. Additionally, there are other departments that provide financial aid to students or dorm space or other activities that contribute to the provision of education. Number two, specialization of job tasks. Bureaucrats are professionals with certain skills or training that qualify them for specific roles. At a university, you have classroom instructors that teach, financial aid counselors that advise students, and school administrators that manage the files and records that we need in order to prove that a student has actually earned a degree. Three, we have the idea of merit-based employment. Civil service are hired on their qualifications, not on the basis of who they know. So at a university, college degrees are typically a condition for employment. A degree reflects, again, that commitment to engage in a sustained study of a given subject. Four, you have this notion of hierarchical structure, right? Bureaucratic agencies have a chain of command that flows from the top to the bottom. At a university, for example, the president manages the overall direction of the university. Vice presidents manage specific areas of the university's operations, like academic affairs, student support, admissions, enrollment management. And then the department heads, and I happen to be a department head, are responsible for the evaluation of instructors, hiring of adjunct instructors, and the production of degree assessment reports. Again, making sure that the degrees we're providing are actually the degrees that students want. And then again, fifth, the idea of standard operating procedures. So the idea of SOPs is that there are uniform ways of performing repetitive routine tasks that have generally been successful in the past. At a university, again, we still go to the classroom. We still expect students to attend classroom discussions and lectures. But there are other routine tasks, again, paperwork that has to be filed. We have to keep things organized so that we know and we can track how many students we have in degree programs, how many degrees we're producing, and things like that. So hopefully we understand what a bureaucracy is. Now we need to understand the legal justifications for bureaucracy. Bureaucratic agencies derive their authority from Article 2, Section 2, which references, again, executive departments under the President. In Article 1, Section 8, the Necessary and Proper Clause empowers Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution its enumerated powers. Additionally, Article 2, Section 1's vesting clause grants presidents the authority over the direction of executive branch agencies and admonishes the president to see that the laws are faithfully executed. The Constitution is silent on how federal bureaucratic agencies should be organized, but constitutional principles like the separation of powers constrains who can serve in a bureaucratic agency and how authority is distributed. For example, the assigned reading notes how members of Congress cannot be employed in a bureaucratic agency because all such agencies are considered part of the executive branch. So members of Congress would have to resign their seats if they wanted to serve in an executive branch agency. The Constitution also clearly establishes a need for several bureaucratic agencies like the Treasury Department, the Census Bureau, and the Post Office. Other bureaucratic agencies established during the administration of George Washington included the State Department, the War Department, and the Attorney General's Office. The Treasury Department was necessary for collecting taxes as stipulated in Article 1. Likewise, the Census Bureau is required by the Constitution to count the population of each state every 10 years to distribute and redistrict seats in the House of Representatives. In the early years of the Republic, the bureaucratic tasks were relatively mundane and included things like collecting taxes, delivering mail, and resolving disputes between citizens. The expansion of the bureaucracy began in the 19th century, but really picked up steam in the 20th century. The Louisiana Purchase dramatically expanded the territories of the United States, which necessitated the appointment of territorial governors, sheriffs, and postmasters. The Civil War significantly expanded the size of the U.S. military, especially the Navy, but also, again, led to the establishment of the Department of Agriculture with the Morrill Act of 1862 to better, again, manage agriculture-related activities, which at the time was a primary occupation of most Americans. Likewise, the modern Department of Justice was reorganized in 1870 to enforce the Civil War amendments and subsequent civil rights legislation, as well as to investigate violent domestic organizations like the Ku Klux Klan, which again, these were kinds of domestic, dissident groups that didn't like the way the Civil War was resolved. The 20th century saw the largest expansion in the size of the federal bureaucracy during the latter phase of the Progressive Era and the New Deal under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The government began to regulate significant aspects of the economy. A number of cabinet-level departments were created over the course of the 20th century, including the Departments of Commerce, Health and Human Services, the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Aviation Commission, the Social Security Administration, and the Environmental Protection Agency, among others. Today, most bureaucratic agencies implement, administer, and regulate federal laws and programs. To illustrate, the Environmental Protection Agency was created in the 1970s to enforce the growing number of environmental protection laws passed by Congress in the preceding decade. Democratic presidents have generally used the EPA more aggressively, while Republicans have tended to basically appoint people to lead the EPA that are, relatively less interested in, kind of zealous enforcement of environmental regulations. Currently, there are more than 2 million people working in the federal bureaucracy, which is a lot of people working in the civil service, but the number of full-time employees working in the federal bureaucracy has not really grown. It's been relatively stable and really hasn't grown since the high water mark of the 1960s. Part of the reason why the size of the federal bureaucracy has remained relatively static, again, is the rising use of contractors to use jobs that used to be done by career civil servants. One of the major tools presidents have to control spending is an executive branch agency called the Office of Management and Budget, also known as the OMB, which has primary responsibility for preparing the federal budget. The director of the OMB has the ability to audit federal agencies to determine whether they're using federal funds as intended. The assigned reading notes that the programs that take up the most of federal spending. And the biggest is Social Security, which is a social insurance plan that requires Americans to pay into a fund over the course of their working lives. And then it makes monthly payments to recipients once they retire and apply for their benefits. In 2019, over $1 trillion in payments were distributed from the Social Security Administration. Medicare and Medicaid payments in 2019 amounted also to over $1 trillion. And then you have defense spending, which in 2019 cost over $676 billion. So the size and the scope of the federal bureaucracy has often been a major point of contention between Democrats and Republicans, with Republicans consistently arguing for significant reductions of federal spending. For example, a significant aspect of Ronald Reagan's domestic program was what was characterized as the devolution revolution, which was a call to return authority assumed by the federal government over the course of the 20th century to state and local government. Conservatives continue to advocate for devolution and generally want to see less government. The problem is that state and local governments lack the ability to raise funds to provide many of the services that federal programs provide. This is something known as revenue capacity. And so it creates an environment where responsibilities may be shifted down to the state level, but many, if not most states, lack the revenue resources to take up those responsibilities. So generally those services decline in quality. And one important factor for understanding bureaucracy in American government is that the size of state bureaucratic agencies increased dramatically in response to this devolution revolution. For a pro-con view of devolution, most advocates are conservatives who believe more responsibility should rest with the states, and they don't like the one-size-fits-all approach most federal programs take. Critics of devolution complain that it produces significant inequalities, and some states are able to match the investments of the federal government, while smaller states, again, they have weaker economies, simply less resources, so they simply are not able to make those kinds of investments. My analysis of devolution is that there are likely some programs that belong at the state level, but many nevertheless require some form of federal subsidy to ensure, again, relatively equitable levels of funding. There are also political realities to consider. State politicians are elected officials. If a state program is devolved to them, they face a stark choice: raise taxes to pay for the program. They face the likelihood of taxpayer revolts that will target them in elections. All too often, state and local politicians reject doing the responsible thing to provide the services that most of their constituents want, because they know that those same voters that want those programs will reject them at the polls because they raise taxes. That disconnect is what drives a lot of the problems in our politics. I'm going to close with a brief description of the structure of the federal bureaucracy. There are four basic types of bureaucratic organization. The largest are executive cabinet departments, which examples include the Defense Department, the Department of Defense, and the most recent addition, the Department of Homeland Security. These are huge agencies that deal with a lot of very complex issues. Next are independent executive agencies, which generally deal with narrower issues and are often independent for political or symbolic reasons. For example, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, was created independently of the Defense Department, despite the fact that most of the engineering and technological expertise needed to get into space could be found in the Defense Department, because they didn't want the international community, and especially the Soviet Union, to think that U.S. missions into space had a military intent. Second, you have independent regulatory commissions. Third, you have independent regulatory commissions, and these are designed to regulate some sector of economic activity. An example would be the Federal Aviation Commission, which is responsible for ensuring that air travel is as safe as possible. Fourth, you have government corporations, which are businesses created by the federal government with the intention of providing a service that no private corporation is willing to provide. One of the first government corporations was called the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was established during the Great Depression to bring electricity to rural parts of the Deep South, where poverty remained so bad that private companies were unwilling to invest in the infrastructure to electrify those rural parts. Finally, the assigned reading discusses the Executive Office of the President, which is an important coordinating body for the federal bureaucracy. It was created during the New Deal era to help the President coordinate and manage the rapidly expanding bureaucracy. The EOP is comprised of several very important coordinating agencies. I mentioned the Office of Management and Budget. There is also the National Security Council and the Council of Economic Advisors. These are very powerful advisory tools that are kind of designed to keep presidents coloring within the lines to make sure that they don't do anything really crazy or off the wall. Their ability to keep presidents in check, though, depend on a president being disciplined enough to accept their advice. And I think that's all I need to say about that. Okay, I hope this presentation is helpful. As always, if you have any questions about anything in this presentation or anything that I didn't address that you find confusing, please let me know in the weekly discussion. I'll try and clear it up there. Let's have a great week.